Hi people, thanks for joining me on this episode. Today I'm going to talk about childhood trauma. Under the background of the episode that I have done about brain functions and the principles of brain development, where I spoke about the primary function of the brain, which is to process sensory data that we come into contact to. Obviously, it goes to the brain and into the body, and it does trigger responses within us. So then if that is the case, it would be right to say that if we have unpleasant, repeated negative experiences that are harmful to us as children, those go through the same process of any other sensory experiences that we have. It goes to the brain, it does affect our development. And this is basically what we call childhood trauma, especially because as children, we are under the care of parents or people who raise us. It is likely that we experience these childhood experiences. We get, whether it's negative experiences, unpleasant experiences, it's likely that because we are around our parents or caregivers, these experiences will come from them. And that's the basis of childhood trauma. And this is the part that, as a society, we don't really like to talk about very openly because we don't want to think of our parents and people who raised us as the ones who caused some of this trauma. And this is information, this is a part of it that I really want to, talk about a bit later. I mentioned that when we have repeated negative experiences that get to the brain does its job, it tries and processes these experiences. And I also mentioned that the ideal conditions of the brain in the previous video, ideal conditions of a healthy brain is positive experiences, growing up in safe environments, having nurturing relationships, and obviously the biology and the genetics of it. Those are the ideal conditions of a healthy brain. And again, if we lack these things, the brain struggles to support healthy development. And this is where we see that people, children, when they lack nurturing relationship, if they're unsafe and have these repeated negative experiences, and that's when trauma happens to them and they experience trauma, they struggle with cognitive functions. And some of these cognitive functions may be learning, concentration, attention, and some difficulties with their memory. And another thing we see when people struggle with trauma or really difficult childhood experiences is that people or children, they struggle to regulate emotions. They also struggle to integrate sensory input. This is why people or children struggle with sensory oversensitivity or even sensory undersensitivity, where we see people acting aggressively in disproportionate intensity because they have very minimal distress tolerance. And in some extreme cases, there can be some emotional numbing, and which again, in some extreme cases, it can cause people to self-harm so that they have some feeling as well. These are very, very extreme cases. Trauma also does affect people's ability to obviously, we hear there's a lot to create and maintain relationships with other people and also with themselves. Again, trauma affects how a child, a human being, develops in terms of it's difficult for them. They get developmental delays. So that's when you hear that children are having speech delays, they're struggling with motor skills in terms of delaying in walking, crawling, things like that. Another issue that does affect children when they experience trauma is difficulty in forming a healthy identity, because the nature of trauma experiences is that they are negative, they are unpleasant, we are taking on unpleasant messaging around you, you start to form internal perceptions that of yourself, or people you love around you, that are very negative and unhealthy, and you start to have a negative self view of yourself. And this can create a sense that you're not worthy, you're not lovable, which is obviously quite distorted and incorrect. And some of this messaging can be either conscious or unconscious. And the truth is, the trauma that we experience remains in our bodies. Most people have probably heard of the book title, The Body Keeps the Score, and also another common newer book called What Happened to You by Oprah and Bruce Perry, who is a big contributor in trauma work. There are more books obviously about trauma, but these two titles highlight that trauma remains in our bodies, and when trauma is not healed or addressed in appropriate ways, what happens is most times how we act or react when things happen to us in our day-to-day interactions, some of that can be explained by the trauma that remains in our bodies, that has been caused by the things that have happened to us as children, or throughout life if we are adults. And this happens whether we are conscious of it or not. And obviously these are invisible scars from a lot of hurt that we've experienced, either as children, as we grow up in relationships, or however that may look like for each person. Some of these experiences that cause childhood trauma can be, which I'll mention them here, but I'll talk to them as we go by. Experiencing emotional abuse or neglect. These can include having an emotionally unavailable parent due to their own either unresolved trauma, due to their own untreated mental health, due to a parent's dependence on alcohol or other drugs, due to, a parent experiencing domestic violence, which is a type of abuse of its own, which I would like to expand on more later. It can also include experiencing physical abuse or physical neglect from parents or people who should have cared for us. Physical neglect and violence has been used as a parenting, a disciplining tool for children. It's emotionally harmful to children, and also sends a message subconsciously that violence is okay. And we know now that violence is not okay in any case. And this is the reason why we see violence to be so rampant in society as a strategy to manage conflict. It also ends up in our own families people can be perpetrators of violence or even victims of violence because of what they experienced as children. So it's very interesting how all of these traumas affect us as parents and individuals. So for me, as a person who's had my own childhood experiences, as a professional in the area of trauma, as a person who has nieces and nephews and hoping to be a future parent, I'm curious about how we emerge from the context of our own individual families and how those early relationships and experiences that we had affect how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to other people, whether it's in friendships, how we relate to our partners, our wives and partners and husbands as well, and how we relate to our own children when we become parents, and also how all of those experiences affect how we make sense of the world that we live in and how we participate in the world and in society. Something that might be worth mentioning here is that just because we've had unpleasant experiences in childhood, just because we weren't careful for whatever reason, because we suffered trauma in the process, it does not mean that we don't love our parents. It does not mean that we shouldn't love our parents. As human beings, we are complex and we can hold conflicting thoughts and feelings at the same time. This is just the nature of of life and of humanity. So yes, we can feel very deeply hurt by our parents or people who should have cared for us, who fell short of what they should have done for us, but we can still love our parents very much. This can be very confusing for our brains if it's not normalized, and I'm really, really mindful of that. So why am I talking about trauma, and why is it bad? Why does it matter? Why am I trying to talk about resolving trauma? Why is it so important? Because trauma affects us as individuals. It affects our relationships. It can cause us to hurt other people, knowingly or unknowingly. And when we hurt other people, we cause pain, and it makes us feel like shit, and we regret. But then it becomes a vicious cycle, a cycle of, hurting, and then, trying to be, whatever emotions that come with that. And, we want to be better than that. We want to be able to pay attention to ourselves. We want to be able to identify the patterns of behaviors that aren't helpful to us, and seek adaptive ways and healthy ways of resolving issues and coping with these issues, and seek help if we need help to change, if we don't have the internal, resources to change ourselves. Because it's not great when we cause pain to other people. It doesn't make us feel great. And the ultimate goal of all of this, the reason why I'm here, is so that hopefully we can connect to ourselves, and we are proud of the people that we are in the world. And because there has been a world of children out there who have been hurt. So we want to heal ourselves and support our children to also heal if they've also experienced trauma or continues to struggle with this particular issue. And you know what? I do have an idea of how we can start to do that. We can start by preventing trauma happening to our children, so that it's not spilling down and hurting the people we love very much. And we can do this prevention by starting to heal ourselves, by being working on ourselves, bringing our awareness to our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, our actions and inactions. That is all a very important maybe place to start. But also knowing that we shall fail and we shall hurt people we love, and we shall disappoint ourselves as well. But falling short for a human being is normal. But when we take time to reflect on our faults and have compassion for ourselves and allow ourselves to repair those important relationships, it will only make those relationships stronger. And towards the end of this, I would say that my wish is that we raise healthy, responsible children who know who they are, who are confident in who they are, and who are brave. And I hope we can be brave, and we know that we belong to people who love us. And but we can't be those people for our children if we don't do the work. So thanks for listening. I am curious if you have any thoughts, questions, reflections. I look forward to hearing them. Thank you. Bye.